In a world that feels like it's being pulled in two different directions, one by conflict, the other by technology. China is quietly rewriting its entire financial playbook. So what's actually changing? And more importantly, what does it mean for global trade and maybe for your investments? Let's dive right in.
So, let's start with the big picture. We're living in a world that is, frankly, on edge. It feels like we're caught between these two massive, disruptive global forces. On one side, you've got geopolitical instability flaring up. And on the other, you've got this technological revolution that is just rewriting all the rules of the game.
So that first force, it's the stark reality of geopolitical conflict. I mean, what happens when the world's most critical trade arteries get clogged up? Well, the effects are felt everywhere, right? Just think about the recent conflict in the Hormuz Strait. I mean, this is one of the most critical energy channels on the entire planet. It's a perfect and kind of scary example of how a local flashpoint can threaten the whole global energy supply almost overnight. And the impact? Oh, it was immediate. Just look at this chart. The mere threat of a blockade sent Brent crude oil prices soaring over 60%. That is a massive shock to energy markets, and it's just such a clear signal of how fragile the whole system really is. Okay, so what about that second force? Well, it's technology, and it's every bit as powerful. We're talking about the absolutely explosive growth of artificial intelligence. And this isn't some far-off future trend. It's happening right now, and it is completely redrawing the global economic map. If you want to get a sense of the scale of this AI revolution, just look at this. In 2025 alone, trade in goods related to AI made up a full 1/3 of all growth in global trade. I mean, that's incredible. AI is literally creating brand new paths for economic growth, even as some of the old ones are getting disrupted. So you've got this incredibly complex environment, right? You've got conflict and technology pulling in different directions. So how is global commerce actually changing? Is everything just grinding to a halt? Well, let's look at the data and see what's really going on. This quote from the McKinsey Global Institute really flips the common narrative on its head. The idea that globalization is dead? Not quite. It's not dying, it's evolving. Countries aren't just unplugging from each other. Instead, they're actively rewiring their trade relationships. And you can see this rewiring happening right in the numbers. Global trade actually hit a historic high in 2025, but the structure of that trade has changed. So while direct trade between the US and China fell about 30%, look at the ASEAN nations. Their trade with both the US and China grew, which positions them as these crucial new hubs in the global supply chain. And here's something wild. This shifting landscape isn't scaring investors off. In fact, it seems like confidence is roaring back. Global M&A deal value, that's mergers and acquisitions, jumped by an incredible 44% year over year. And it gets even better. The value of M&A exits, that's when investors successfully cash out of their investments, it's surged by an even more impressive 47%. So what this tells us is that capital is not just sitting on the sidelines, it is actively being put to work. But, and this is a big but, this recovery is super concentrated. A tiny handful of deals are driving almost all the growth. I mean, just 13 megadeals, each worth over $10 billion, made up $274 billion of the total M&A value. And most of that action was centered right in North America. So how is China navigating this? Well, this volatile global backdrop? Its response has been to look inward. It's focusing on building a stronger, more resilient, and way more unified financial system, basically from the ground up. And the cornerstone of this whole strategy is a new foundational financial law. You can think of it like they're creating one clear, comprehensive rulebook for the entire system. The goal is to get rid of regulatory gaps, make it crystal clear who's in charge of what, and give regulators much stronger tools to manage risk before it turns into a crisis. And this isn't just some high-level theory, it's being applied to specific regulations too. So, for example, the rules for Chinese companies lending money to their operations overseas, well, they used to be totally different depending on the currency. Now they've been unified into a single, much simpler system, and they've expanded the lending capacity. Okay, so these new rules are clearly reshaping the system from the inside out. But what does all of this actually mean for you, the international investor who's looking at the Chinese market? Well, one of the key new tools they're rolling out is a formal rating system for wealth management companies. It's pretty much an official report card.
It gives investors a really clear, standardized way to check out the risk and performance of different institutions, which should boost transparency across the whole board. So, for any investor, the big takeaway here is that China is signaling a very, very clear playbook. The new #1 priority is stability, not just breakneck growth. That's going to mean more scrutiny, sure, but also more transparency. And they're explicitly guiding capital towards these 5 strategic sectors that you see right here. And it really looks like the international community is paying close attention, because even with these new, stricter domestic rules, the market is still a major destination for international capital. We're talking about foreign entities holding over 7 trillion yuan in Chinese stocks and bonds. But even with the most robust, well-planned domestic policies imaginable, there's always one major variable that remains, something that's just outside of any single nation's control. And that, of course, is the threat of external shocks. Domestic policy can act as a shield, but as we saw with the conflict in the Hormuz Strait, global energy shocks are a universal threat. A crisis halfway around the world can send energy prices skyrocketing for everyone, completely overriding local conditions. Which really leaves us with a final, provocative thought. In a world that's more interconnected than ever, where trade routes are constantly rewiring and new technologies are popping up all the time, maybe, just maybe, the greatest risks are the ones that lie completely outside of any single country's carefully constructed playbook.